On a Japanese airport runway, disaster strikes.
My mind went blank. Smoke started to fill the cabin.
2 planes, including an airliner with more than 350 people on board, are destroyed.
Honestly, I was scared to death.
There's a miraculous escape for many.
The crew of that Japan Airlines aircraft did an amazing job. Quite incredible that such a successful outcome came.
But 5 are killed in a collision at Tokyo's Haneda airport. 2 aircraft, 1 runway, same time.
It was quite shocking because there's so many different layers of safety. I find it surprising that they were all breached and that this actually happened.
The moment a passenger plane touches down, there's an explosion. Then there's a fire underneath the aircraft. Its nose gear has collapsed, but it keeps going down the runway. The landing plane, Japan Airlines Flight 516, has hit a smaller Coast Guard aircraft on the tarmac. Passengers film as the cabin fills with smoke.
My mind went blank. Smoke started to fill the cabin straight away, and I was scared to think there really was an accident.
I was with my son. We were on a family holiday. To be honest, I thought maybe there was a chance that we wouldn't be saved.
Due to the smoke, I couldn't see the front, but I sensed the door was open and the slide was down, so I wanted to go to the front, but it was crowded with so many people, I gave up. While waiting, another slide came down in the back, so I escaped that way. Honestly, I was scared to death, but when I was able to get out of the plane, I felt relieved. I escaped with my family on foot.
I just came here to pick up a friend. It was pretty scary. Like the whole airport just froze. The people that were boarding planes all had to get off. Planes just completely stopped everywhere. And yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Miraculously, all 379 passengers and crew on the JAL plane get out alive. But eventually, the aircraft is completely engulfed. Tragically, 5 of the 6 crew on the Coast Guard plane lay dead. Japan Airlines Flight 516 took off on the 2nd of January from Sapporo's new Chitose airport at around 4:30 local time. It followed its usual flight path heading south before swinging northwest towards Haneda Airport. A transcript of air communications has been released by the Transport Ministry in Tokyo. 4 minutes before the collision at 5:43, air traffic control tells the JAL aircraft to continue its approach to runway 34R, or 34 right, for landing. A controller also tells the crew that at the time there will be a departing plane saying, "We have a departure." At 5:44, JAL 516 is cleared to land. Seconds later, a controller tells the Coast Guard plane, JA722A, Tokyo Tower good evening, number 1, taxi to holding point C5. The Coast Guard plane repeats the message back. But it moves past the holding point onto the runway and directly into the path of the JAL aircraft. The crash happens at 5:47, the JAL aircraft coming to a stop on the grass at the side of the runway.
My name's Michelle Robson and I was an air traffic controller at the London Air Traffic Control Centre for 23 years and I also worked as a safety manager there for area control. A lot of people are questioning why the Japan Airlines pilot didn't see the aircraft on the runway. I think there's probably a lot of answers for that. Firstly, the runway lights are naturally extremely bright, and the pilot is concentrating on those and making sure that he lands in the right position. Also, it was quite a small aircraft. There is talk that some of the lights were out on it, but we don't know if that's confirmed yet.
The Coast Guard plane was filmed in the seconds leading up to the crash. It's circled in red. Pictures show the aircraft taxiing directly onto the runway. The pilot, the only survivor from the plane, has been quoted saying, "We entered the runway as we received permission to do so." The stop signals at the runway entrance were not working fully, but analysts say this is not uncommon. The plane is on the runway for up to 40 seconds before being struck.
40 seconds sounds like a long amount of time, but we don't know what the controller was doing within that. He could well have been looking at other aircraft that he was controlling at that point. From the tower, it's not necessarily immediately obvious with a small aircraft taxiing onto the runway. He may have been looking at the arriving aircraft.
The Coast Guard plane was on a mission to take relief supplies to Japan's west coast. An earthquake had struck the area the day before. The airport collision was the second tragedy to hit Japan in 2 days. Being a relatively small aircraft affected where the Coast Guard plane was positioned on the runway for takeoff.
So normally most aircraft would take off from the end because they need the length. However, because he was a small aircraft, he was cleared to a midpoint to take off from there because he doesn't need the full length of the runway. So he's not where an aircraft normally would be, and it's not where the controller would normally be looking. They'd normally be looking at the end of the runway where things are coming into land or other aircraft are lining up potentially.
If there's doubt about the cause of the accident, there's none at all about the success of getting all the passengers and crew off the JAL plane without serious injury. Some electrical circuits had failed, but the emergency pathway lighting and lighting around the doors worked well. The evacuation followed relative calm in the cabin.
There were screams, and the flight attendant was leading us with a loud voice. Even though I heard screams, mostly people were calm and did not stand up from their seats, but kept sitting and waiting. That's why I think we were able to escape smoothly.
The JAL plane and Airbus A350 had 8 emergency exits. Only 3 of them could be used, 2 at the front and 1 at the rear because of the fire. The cockpit crew couldn't give permission for the rear exit to be used as the intercom system had failed. So the cabin crew opened the door anyway, as they are trained to do. The full evacuation of the plane, 367 passengers and 12 crew, was completed 18 minutes after the collision. The pilot was the last person to leave the aircraft at 6:05.
Authorities mobilised around 100 fire trucks to try and control the blaze. And in the end, it took more than 6 hours to control the fire. And it's only when you could see it close up that you realise how miraculous it was that many people managed to escape the plane and the fire in time. Experts say it's because of Japan's safety procedures and because of its training of its crews that they were able to respond and get those people off safely.
I'm Graham Braithwaite and I'm the Professor of Safety and Accident Investigation at Cranfield University. When I first saw the footage of the aircraft land and that fireball as the 2 aircraft collided, my heart was in my stomach because I really wasn't sure that everybody would get off that Japan Airlines aircraft alive. Quite incredible that such a successful outcome came, and I think that's testament to the aircraft, to the crew, also to the discipline of the passengers on the day and the way in which it all came together.
Professor Braithwaite has studied crashes all over the world, including in Japan.
The Japanese culture is renowned for being quite hierarchical, and actually that might have been a real positive here, where people were willing to follow the instructions of the safety professionals, the cabin crew in this particular circumstance. We know that in Japanese society that the fire alarms and evacuation tests are part of daily life, whether it's in schools or in workplaces, and that discipline may well have helped in this particular circumstance. We can see what looks like a remarkably calm cabin when you see the orange glow outside the windows, and you can see some smoke in the air. You can imagine the smell was quite frightening as well for those on board. They seem to be responding incredibly well to the cabin crew. Now, cabin crew have this job of trying to communicate between each other to work out at what point an evacuation might be ready to commence. And they're doing that in part through hand signals, but they're also providing really important guidance for the passengers on board the aeroplane.
Leave your baggage when you evacuate.
荷物を持つと通路を塞ぎます。
Carrying baggage will block the aisle. Passengers on board the flight will have watched this detailed safety video.
使えなくなる恐れがあります。
Baggage and high-heeled shoes may damage the slide.
Japan Airlines is a really good example of one of the leading airlines when it comes to safety. Now, if you go back into their history, in 1985 they suffered the world's worst single aircraft accident, and it involved a 747 which lost its tail in flight.
The plane came down in one of Japan's most inaccessible spots. The searchers couldn't even reach it until dawn, nearly 12 hours after the crash. But when they did, there seemed little hope of finding survivors.
Now, that meant that within the company they took safety incredibly seriously. And in fact, the cause of that accident was not Japan Airlines' fault, but they took it so seriously that in terms of how they learn from events, how they train staff, how they deliver their safety videos and so on, it's all part of that commitment. And you do see it from the highest levels within that company and the way in which they talk and act on safety. So the A350 is a very new design, and actually the fuselage, the body of the aircraft, is made out of a carbon composite structure. And so, of course, it needed to meet certain design standards to make sure that in a fire it would withstand the fire for long enough for passengers to get off. But this is the first time we've really seen it in action, and it seems to have performed incredibly well. Although we see pictures of the fuselage later very much alight, a very severe fire, actually it was delayed for sufficient a period that it was safe for people to get off. So I think what we're seeing, and the investigators will be really interested to examine this, manufacturers will be very interested, is that it seems to have worked incredibly well.
Within days of the crash, Japan began rolling out new safety measures. Japanese air traffic controllers no longer use the term number one. It refers to the plane next in line to take off. But it's thought the Coast Guard plane may have misunderstood it to mean permission to enter the runway. Some believe bigger changes to aircraft communications may be needed.
航空機と艦船のやり取り
We're still in an age where the interactions between air traffic controllers and aircraft are analogue. For many years, we have viewed this as one of the major aviation risks. I think lessons can be drawn from the accident. This is something that needs to be addressed not only by us, but by the whole industry.
For an event like this to have happened, more than one thing has had to go wrong. So although we can describe the what, which was that there appears to be an aircraft on a runway that it was not cleared to be on, the why will be much harder. Investigators do need to step back and say, what can we learn to prevent the next accident? So in that way, we may focus on other things like how to protect runways from an incursion by an aircraft, or it could be a vehicle in another circumstance.
I think it was quite shocking because this sort of event hasn't happened for a long time, and because there are so many safeguarding things in place. You know, there should be a runway incursion tool, there should be stop bars that stop aircraft going onto a runway that they don't realise is there. There should be things in the tower. So there's so many different layers of safety. I find it surprising that they were all breached and that this actually happened.